Ron Evans from the Hybrid Group in Los Angeles. And Ron and I worked together apart at Apple many years ago. Never knew each other back in those days, but we have collaborated on various things since then, including a musical tribute to the one and only Tenderlove, which we will not be presenting here this week. Don't worry, Aaron. Anyway, Ron is a hardware hacker. He's a software hacker. He's a musician and has a lovely singing voice, he's just an all-around great guy and entertaining. So. We chose him to lead off your morning and ease you into a day of awesome, mind-blowing things. So, Ron, take it away.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Before I get started, I just want to say what an amazing job the third year of this conference is, and a special thank you to Leah, to Josh, and to Jim, and to all the rest of the staff for doing a fantastic job. Let's give them a big round of applause. They work hard. Come on. So I'm Ron Evans. I'm also known as Dead Program on Twitter. That's much more interesting than my real name. I work at the Hybrid Group in Los Angeles. We're a consulting and development company. We're also the creators of Kanban Pad, which is the friendliest project management tool in the world, and Clutch, which lets you integrate 15 different project management systems into one beautiful feed. But enough about me. Let's talk about you. Like, anybody recognize this? This was the job posting bulletin board after about 1 hour at RailsConf, and there were 3 of them like this. By the end of the last day, I'm not sure if anyone was pulling other people's ads off, but there was no space. And it's crazy right now. It is great to be a programmer, right? I mean, you got people you don't even know calling you up on the phone and saying, well, do you hang out with any rock stars, or do you personally know any ninjas? I mean, it's completely nuts. Last year, Rich Kilmer stood in this exact spot and was explaining how the demand was way greater than the supply of software developers, and just a couple of months later, his whole company got bought. That's how hard it is to find a consultancy. Just a couple of months later, their competitor bought Optiva. So, maybe we'll get bought by me just standing in here. I don't know. But it's a real problem, because we just do not have enough software developers to meet the demand. In fact, if we look at the statistics according to the United States Department of Labor, we see that over the last 5 years, secondary school computer science education has actually been decreasing almost 40%, which ironically is the exact same percentage of increase that is expected by the United States Department of Labor. In other words, we're on an unsustainable course. I call it peak programmer. I don't really have the numbers, but I think it happened sometime around the late 80s. And it really makes you wonder, where are we going? In a technology-based society, where our entire civilization is dependent on technology, we don't have the human power to continue on that course. And who's to blame? Well, really, it's all of us. Because in a society that values buffoonery over substance, really, we're all to blame. Go ahead, please. Thank you. But it wasn't always this way. It was only just a few short years ago that we valued people of substance over people who were famous, where we were men and women who were the makers of things and not simply the consumers of things. So what do we need to do to turn this around? We need to capture the hearts and minds of the young while they're still young. Yes, that's exactly right. Why the Lucky Stiff understood this. Yes, the late, great Why the Lucky Stiff. He understood this really well, and he spent a lot of time thinking about kids and teaching them programming, and he created an amazing thing called Hackety-Hack. Hackety-Hack, the problem was that it understood that you don't need to be complex to be fun, because programming is fun. I'm going to say that again because it's really important. Programming is fun. And yes, absolutely. And you don't need complicated, expensive graphics and fancy IDEs to really get something out of it. And it's interesting because a battle between menus and the command prompt took place long before any of us were born, between the great Marvin Minsky and Edward Feigenbaum. And the two of them had a battle between human-machine interaction that today we are seeing the repercussions of. Perhaps the command prompt is not so bad. Perhaps the possibilities that are opened up by the command prompt create a world of imagination where simply having several options to choose from limits your choices. Maybe that's one of the reasons why most of the great developers tend to go towards the Unix. But the problem with Hackety-Hack was why disappeared. He went back to the magic programming world from whence he came, and he took all of his code with him. A few brave individuals, primarily Steve Klobnik, who was a Ruby Heroes Award winner at RailsConf, actually quit his day job to attempt to rescue Wise Code and did a remarkable job. However, we thought it was time for a fresh start, and so we created KidsRuby. So this is a good time for a demo. KidsRuby is a fresh start. It's somewhat like Sinatra is to Rails, KidsRuby is to Hackety-Hack. It takes a new and clean approach. So let's take a look at it. Look at it on Mac first. So here we see the very, very simple, you just type in your code. Let's just say puts hello. And we click on the run button, and it runs it. So it's very, very simple. You have immediacy. You can, if you are a young or learning programmer, you could see, here's the code, and here's what it does immediately. It's very, very simple. Let's do something a little more interesting. Or actually, my son, he suggested I use negation. My dad is not cool. Yes, that's his favorite application for KidsRuby. So we have it running here, obviously, on Macintosh. Let's take a look here at it running in Windows. Now, one of the things about KidsRuby is that we made it so that it worked with all of the same code examples as Hackety-Hack. So you could do things like the alert method, which would bring up a simple dialog. Another cool thing that you could do, if we go to, we also support the turtle graphics. If anybody's familiar with turtle graphics, the fantastic work done by Seymour Papert with teaching kids how the program had to do with a small robotic turtle which would draw on the floor using the equivalent of Sharpies in that day. So Hackety-Hack supports that. And so one of the cool things that kids can do is they can create their own turtle graphics, like this starburst. So drawing is fun. Colors are fun. Interaction and immediacy are fun. So we took it even further. This is KidsRuby running in Ubuntu. We call it the KidsRuby OS. And it is a custom Ubuntu remix, which allows you to boot up on any old device. So let's take a look at that. Hello from Ubuntu. One of the other things that we did that was particularly interesting was there's a lot of excellent work being done by another project called Ruby for Kids. Ruby for Kids is the project of Alberto Morales and Bill Davenport, and they created an entire set of tutorials for kids to learn game programming using the Gosu game library. So we include that with the KidsRuby OS, and this is a little bit of Gosu code. Voila. So here you have a complete game development environment for kids, or adults for that matter, but it gives them something to work on, because if you are a young person learning programming today, you either want to make games or build robots, or you don't actually care, and you're just saying this to your parents. Right? We all know this. All right. So how'd we do it? It's Ruby 192. It's just your Ruby that you are using right now, today, right? We're all using Ruby 192 finally? It's one parent said, my kid's using a newer Ruby than I am. Well, I hope so. It uses the Qt multi-platform framework, which runs on many different platforms, including on very low-powered embedded processors. It uses WebKit, which is the web browser component plugin, which is used in a variety of different web browsers. It's JavaScript and jQuery. And it's HTML and CSS. All of the tutorials and content that you saw are all just regular old vanilla web pages like many people know how to create. The idea here was we needed to lower the bar to entry. Hackety-Hack required learning some specialized code in a framework called Shoes in order to make any changes to it. And that was one of the obstacles. Lots of people wanted to contribute. Lots of people wanted to work with it, but they didn't want to learn yet another framework. So here's how it all works together. So we see the KidsRuby application up here. We have the WebKit browser, which was the user interface you saw. There's also a built-in HTTP server inside the application. And once it launches the kid's own running Ruby process, which is a separate running Ruby, it's just regular Ruby. That way you can do anything that you can do in the Ruby language with any Ruby gems. Once it's running, we then have hooked into standard I/O, standard air, and then also have another protocol to control the turtle. So we're just using HTTP as our protocol to communicate back because it's a well-understood, well-known protocol that works on many different frameworks and platforms. We originally started using dbus, but dbus did not have Windows support. So we had to create standalone installers, which was actually one of the more difficult parts. I mean, if you are a Ruby developer, you're probably using a Mac. And that means that you were told, if you want to get the latest code, go download and install Xcode and build Ruby. Well, I don't know about you guys, but if I try to tell a 12-year-old, well, just download Xcode and build Ruby, they'll be like, what? So we needed to create standalone installers. So we created one for Windows. This was the oldest Windows logo I could find. So this is actually based on the Rails installer, which is an Engine Yard-sponsored project. A lot of the fantastic work of Wayne Seguin and Luis Lavena went into creating the Ruby installer. So we combined all of these things together and created the standalone Windows installer. We also have an OS 10 installer as of last week. This was the oldest Apple logo I could find as well. It actually is a bit of a problem on OS 10 because you have to compile and build in order to install Ruby, right? Wrong. We created a universal binary installation and made it support several of the older operating systems. That way, you've got a double-clickable installer, you run it, you install it, you load the editor, you get going. And then, of course, I showed you briefly the KidsRuby OS, which is an Ubuntu remix. The idea here is we thought it'd be really interesting if you could use old or underpowered hardware to use to teach kids programming, because when you go to many schools, they have a pile of old, frankly, kind of crappy hardware. And you've got to work with it. That's all they've got. They've got nothing else. So I wanted to take a moment to thank the dev team. Here in the open source world, we really do not give enough credit to all of the people who work really hard and devote a lot of their hours and personal time. So I just wanted to take a moment to thank everyone on the KidsRuby development team. Alexander Giraldo, Ari Lerner, Christian Trosclair. Some of these people, by the way, are here at the conference. If you see them, say thank you. Daniel Fischer, Hong Quach, Lake Denman, Matt Silipoli, Phil Cohen, Wayne Seguin. I asked Wayne for a picture when he was a kid, and he sent me one of him acting like a kid. That's not me, I swear. And then myself. So we're the development team for KidsRuby project. So you can be too. We want your help. We need you. And we know that you may or may not have time to fork the repositories and to look at committing some code and figuring out what our problems are and telling us how to fix them. You might not really be interested in that. You might just want to teach some kids. So we thought, let's give them a simple 5-step plan of how you can start your own KidsRuby. First of all, you need kids. Now, I don't know if you've noticed, but there are kids everywhere. You do not need to use your own kids. We do not provide kids, but you will find friends, neighbors, hackers of yours that you work with that surprisingly have kids. So this is actually a picture from one of the KidsRuby classes that we taught at Ruby on Rails in Bend, Oregon. And this young lady in the center with the amazing posture, She actually was halfway through Chris Pine's Learn to Code before we started the class. Very impressive. I would hire her now. So then you need a location. One of the things that we've discovered is that it is amazing to co-locate your kids' programming class with a geek conference because you've already got geeks there. Right? It's pretty easy. So we did one at Bar Camp, Los Angeles. We did it at, we've done them at a bunch of conferences. This is a perfect time mentioning, we will have a KidsRuby programming class on Sunday, thanks to Sarah May and Pivotal Labs for donating the space and cooperating. So 12 to 2 might be kind of hard to get up, but come on out and help us. It's really, really fun because we need you volunteers. Think about how you got started coding. It was because some older person put up with your annoying questions long enough to get you started to do something interesting, and then you took off from there. If it wasn't for the mentorship and the leadership of these just random people, sometimes we don't even know. I mean, I have often depended upon the kindness of strangers in the open source world. So we all owe it to ourselves and each other. You need candy, lots of candy. And it's not just for you. It's also to keep the parents busy while you're teaching their kids to hack. Because otherwise they're like, I got to go, we got ballet. And then last but not least, you need toys. Really, you need toys. And it's not, we give out a USB drive with all of the KidsRuby software at the class for a couple of reasons. One, I believe Sarah May mentioned it in her talk on teaching kids to program in Los Angeles a couple of years ago. One of the biggest problems when teaching a kids class is getting Ruby on there in the first place. That was why we created the double-clickable installers, and we give it to them on a USB drive. There's nothing to download. You don't even need an internet connection, which it turns out many of these classes they don't have. So you just install and go. And that's it. It's really easy. But just one more thing. Last week, we received an amazing opportunity from a team of like-minded individuals located in the United Kingdom. They have been working on the same problem of teaching kids to program as we have, but they've taken a hardware approach. So what I'm going to do right now is introduce to you, for the first time ever in the United States, the Raspberry Pi $25 kids computer. This is an alpha prototype. No one has seen this yet. The actual developers at the Raspberry Pi team will not be showing this until Maker Faire in New York tomorrow. So you've gotten the scoop. Go Cali. All right, so let's plug this thing in and see what it does. Should be interesting. Can we switch over to the other monitor, please? All right, plugging in the, it's an ARM processor, 700 megahertz, ARM 11. It has no built-in drive. It just runs everything off of a built-in SD card, which is 2 gigabytes in size. Let's see. So this is beyond prototype. Literally, the board was still kind of warm when I unpacked it from the solder. So it's very, very cheap hardware. Very, very, very cheap hardware. And then we're running a Debian OS because Ubuntu doesn't actually run on the ARM processor currently due to some hardware incompatibilities. So Arch Linux will work and Debian, which is kind of our more preferred. So let's log in here. It's kind of hard to see. Hopefully it's working. Yes, well, alpha prototypes and all. Oh, there we go. I see a prompt. Oh, okay, good. Okay, let's start up X Windows, hopefully. Oh, typo. There we go. So it is launching LXDE, which is the Light X Windows desktop environment, which is a very, very minimal. All right. So let's see if we can, there's the mouse. Anybody see a mouse on the screen? It is? This was the hardest part. It doesn't actually fit on this monitor. Tell me when I'm all the way at the left. All right, I see it. A little more. Little more. I have to get to this one menu or else I can't launch the app. It's really annoying. Aha. LX terminal, is that it? Very good. I did click on it, yes? All right, very good. Now remember, this is running on a 700 megahertz ARM processor, like might be in your phone. Oh, whoops. Didn't want to launch that. Let's see here. There we go. All right. So let's change to the KidsRuby directory. And let's run it. And let's see what happens. This should be interesting. Now remember, it does not have any hard disk. It's running everything, the entire operating system, the swap files. It's literally running everything off of this tiny little toy computer, hopefully. And yes, we have KidsRuby. And just to prove it to you, hello from Raspberry Pi. Hope there's no syntax errors. And slowly, very, very slowly, it works. So if Tender Love was wondering why I mentioned we need a little optimization assistance later, this now you know. All right. So we can switch back here, please. So you might be wondering, if you don't have kids of your own, why should you care? I mean, isn't that somebody else's problem? Well, in 1969, when Buckminster Fuller published this book, Utopia or Oblivion, he became very well known for a phrase, find the universal intersections. And what he was really talking about was the interconnectedness of the entire human species, that people all over the world have an influence and an impact on people on the other side of the world without even necessarily realizing it. And that there's no way to disregard this fact living in the 21st century. And really, the stakes have been raised. I mean, we have the thing we used to call the digital divide. And at the time, we were talking about people who had access to computers and those who did not. But the digital divide is still alive and well. It just moved upstream. Now the divide takes the form of the dichotomy between consumers of information who use consumer devices like the iPad and the creators and producers of information who use more formal computing devices. This is creating a sort of elitist class society where you've got those who program and those who are programmed. So this is just one possible dystopian outcome. Another, we have our entire civilization dependent on advanced technologies with a smaller and smaller pool of people able to maintain them. This cannot end well. Which future would you rather live in? Because as Alan Kay said, the best way to predict the future is to invent it. So join us, invent the future, KidsRuby.com, on Twitter, at KidsRuby IRC, KidsRuby on Freenode. Come to our class and help us, fork the repository, tell us, and be a part of the next generation of Ruby. Thank you.